May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be ever mindful of thee, O Lord, my strength and my salvation. Amen. I want to talk to you this morning about our reading from the Old Testament, the story of Jacob and Esau. It's a fun little story that I think many people will remember from their childhood Sunday school. It's very dramatic. It does well for drama and all that, but there's more to it than just a story about people far away and far off long ago. It's a story of God's promises and purposes and how God works in the world. And this is a hot topic. It's been one that Christians have been divided over and argued about for 2,000 years. And we're no closer to an answer, but I want to share with you where I come down on this. So this is not going to be a class where I lay out one side and balance the other. I'm going to give you totally one side of the argument. And that is on the topic of predestination and election. Our reading is Genesis 25. And I think it's neat that Sandy Torres got to read that this morning. Oh, she probably could put herself in Rebecca's position as a mother of twin boys. But I pray and hope Caden and Cason's future are not going to be like Jacob and Esau. The story picks up in the 19th verse of chapter 25. It talks about the descendants of Abraham's son, Isaac. Now, Abraham had other sons. He had Ishmael, we talked about in the past few weeks. And then after Sarah died, Abraham married a second time and had 6 more boys. But we don't hear anything about these people ever again. God's purposes, God's plans were the children born to Abraham and Sarah. And that was one child, and that was Isaac. And God's promises, God's plan for the changing of the world lay through this particular line: Abraham, Isaac, and Isaac's children. Now, as we're starting off, Abraham and Isaac have been married for almost 20 years, but Isaac and Rebecca have been married for almost 20 years. And they've no children. And they pray and they pray. This is what Abraham and Sarah went through. God's promise was that they would have, their descendants would be as numerous as in the stars in the heavens, but nothing's happened. Well, Isaac and Rebekah didn't make the mistake that Abraham and Sarah did and try to sort of force it along by having a child through Ishmael. They prayed, and it finally came about. And Rebekah became pregnant. But this was a difficult pregnancy. She writes, the children struggled together within her, and she said, if this is to be this way, why do I live? She was miserable. The babies in her womb were fighting, and she was sick. She had prayed and wanted so long to have these children. And now this was a terrible experience, and she prayed to God, Lord, why? What's going on? What am I to take from this? And the Lord did not answer that question. He didn't say to her, here's why you're having all these terrible physical pains and problems and the babies are kicking and fighting in the womb. Instead, the Lord spoke to her differently, on a different topic and a different question. The Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples born of you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The elder shall serve the younger. Before these children were ever born, God had laid out a plan that the youngest of the 2 children would break with tradition, break with custom, and he would be the head of the household. It would be through his line that the peoples who were descendants of Abraham and Sarah would fill the star, be as numerous as the stars in the sky. So the boys are finally born, And the first one born is called Esau. And Esau means basically fuzzy or hairy. Esau was red, and he's all covered with red. I don't know if it means his skin was red or he had red hair, but Esau was a ruddy, hairy, manly sort of guy from the get-go. And his younger brother was Jacob, who was smoother. And Jacob came out holding on to the heel of Esau. And Jacob can mean, may God protect, but it also means, it's a pun, heel. Not a heel like a bad person, but the thing on the back of your foot. And it also means a usurper, a supplanter. All those words sort of all sound alike. It's like in English, bear, bear, bear. It can mean many different things depending upon the context. But these two boys were very different. Esau grew up to be his father's joy. Strong, athletic, vigorous, an outdoorsman. What we'd call today the all-American boy. Jacob was a weenie. He was a man of the tents. He stayed at home. He was a plain man. You can make whatever you want with that. But if you look on the outside, he was much less impressive. And as we begin to see, he was a little bit sneaky. Well, the time and Abraham and Isaac favored Esau, and Rebekah favored Jacob. That's not a good situation when a parent has a favorite and the other person is divided against them. This is not a happy home. Well, Esau has gone out hunting. And Esau has come back and he's starving. And Jacob is inside and he's cooking away. And Esau says to Jacob, "Let me have a pot of those red beans." Now, Esau's nickname was Edom, which means ruddy or red. So, let me have a pot of the red stuff. I'm dying. I'm so hungry. I'm famished. And Jacob decides to be a little sneaky and says, "Sell me your birthright and I'll feed you." And Esau says, yeah, whatever you want. I don't care. It doesn't bother me. And so Jacob says, "Swear it." And Esau says, "Sure, why not?" And he's provided with a meal and bread. And it closes off by saying, "Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright." Now, what's a birthright? Well, that would mean the eldest always received the bulk of the estate, the most of the property. That's one level, but on a different level, the eldest is responsible for the priestly duties, the spiritual duties. Esau was a man who lived for the moment, action. He had no interest whatsoever in anything spiritual. He didn't care. He lived in the here and now. Jacob was a planner, and he knew what he wanted. He wanted to be the one whose descendants would fulfill the promises made by God, not Esau. Esau didn't care. And that's the point of thus Esau despised his birthright. After this sort of dirty deal was done, he didn't complain to his father. He didn't argue. He didn't say, this is under duress or anything like that. He said, "Fine, I'm done." And he walked away without a care in the world. He despised his birthright. Now, the story of Jacob and Esau continues into the next chapters, and it's an ongoing struggle and a fight. But what it lays out is the Christian understanding of divine election. Why some people seem to have God's favor and others don't. Now, it's a very tough topic in the sense of we Christians don't agree on it. Evangelical Protestants, of which I am one, do not agree. And there are really two schools that come down out of this. One roughly is called Calvinism. And those are people like Presbyterians, many Episcopalians, from the Reformed tradition. And then there are called Arminians, not Armenians, but Arminians with an I, after a Dutch scholar named Jacob Arminius. That's people like Baptists and Episcopalians and Methodists. And the differences are that the Calvinists believe that God's divine sovereignty, his will, determines who's in, who's out. You're saved, there's nothing you can do about it because God's already decided you're saved, and that's that. It's his choice. He has the will and the power, and he's done it. The Arminian response is that God is not like that. God is not a king who exercises his power through his sovereign will. He has sovereign will, but God is more like a loving parent. And God does not will the death and the destruction of anybody. See, God's love and his goodness and his justice make no sense whatsoever if some people are going to be born to be damned and destroyed, and there's nothing they can do about it. How is that fair? How do we square that with a loving God? Now, this is, if you will, the dividing line within the modern Protestant world, so to speak. And I'm sure there are other categories. But in my heart, as I'm sure you will figure out after having heard me preach all these years on these topics without using these words, where I come down, it's you have a choice, I believe, whether or not to accept God's love for you. Now, God knows what your choice is going to be, but he still gives you the free will choice to decide whether or not to take it. Now, the story of Esau and Jacob, here, God has already told Rebekah ahead of time that Jacob is going to be the one who will be the heir. Now, Jacob, as an adult, he's not really an attractive person. He's sort of shifty and sneaky and weak, and he's a weenie. Yet God sees in him something deep down inside, and eventually, as Jacob goes through the trials and tribulations of life, he finally emerges as the person God knew he would be. But Esau just didn't care. He rejected it. It was not because God made him reject it, but God gave him the choice. And the choice was to sell his birthright, to sell his priestly office, to sell his future to satisfy the pleasures of today. See, I believe that grace is resistible. God's grace is available to all people. See, I believe that Jesus Christ died on the cross for everybody, not just the elect. And that grace is given to all people. Now, some Christians believe that grace is irresistible. If you got it, you got it. You can't do anything about it. I don't believe that. I believe that you can say no to God. You can resist his love. You can turn your back on him. And that leads to your destruction. But God is drawing all people to him, but he's not going to force you to do it. See, predestination, I believe, is based on God's foreknowledge. He knows how things are going to turn out, but he's not going to tell you ahead of time, but he's still giving everybody the opportunity to come to him. The other thing, and this is not as theologically sound, I guess, is that I've met people who believe, I believe I'm saved. That means I don't have to do anything. I don't got to do nothing. For me, that's just an awful thing to hear. Because one of the things I believe as Christians we're called to pursue in this life is holiness. If you don't need to pursue holiness because it's already been decided, the way I think of it is like I give a credit card to my children with no limit. Do you think they're ever going to learn budgeting? Of course not. They don't have to. It's all taken care of. But if you have to go through life and meet your challenges and battle and struggle and work towards living a life that you know is pleasing to God, you are not falling victim of succumbing to this pridefulness to say, I'm saved, and they're not. Those poor people who are, they're black or they're Jewish or they're this or they're that. They're not like me. Oh, I think that's horrible. We're called to love and to serve. We really don't need to know the outcome, I don't believe. I believe we really only need what to do. See, the assurance that we're going to be saved is given to us by the power of the Holy Spirit in our lives. The deeper we get, the farther we walk, the harder we work, the more filled with the power of the Spirit is what I experience. Doesn't mean I'm a better person. The deeper I go, the more obvious it is to me of my gross failings and how much harder I do have to work. But friends, I don't want to go too far afield. What we need to focus on are the choices we make. Are we going to be an Esau and just throw it all away and live for the moment, live for today? Do what the crowd wants, do what we think is smart, do what we think is clever? Or are we going to pursue what is right? We're going to be a Jacob and know what the good is, but I'll take care of it until I need God. Both are wrong ways. But Esau's way is actually the worst of the two. Esau knows but doesn't care. Jacob knows and knows he's not doing the right thing, but he does it anyway. Eventually, his heart is opened and cleaned and pure. It takes a long time. And we'll read about that in chapter 26 of the book of Genesis. Amen.